The Union soldiers on the other side until more Union soldiers showed up behind them. And the slaughter over here was just terrible. And if you look behind you here, you can see one of the famous photos they took.
A single photograph can rewrite the story we thought we knew. An attic trunk, a sealed album, and a Civil War image in impossible color. Lincoln, Grant, and a silent figure no one could place. Experts leaned in and their faces went pale. Lab scans, forensic notes, and a letter signed only Al. We'll uncover the discovery, the chemistry that shouldn't work, the man in the middle, Lincoln's shadow network, the stitched message tied to April 14, the experimental process behind the image, and the letter that explains why it was buried. The photo that shouldn't exist. It all began with a day of cleaning, not discovery. Claire Donovan wasn't searching for anything extraordinary when she found the battered trunk in her family's attic. Its leather straps were cracked, the brass latch barely hanging on after a century of heat and dust. Inside were the ordinary relics of a bygone era: railroad bonds, lace gloves, faded letters, and tarnished buttons. But buried under those mementos was something heavier, something that seemed to hum with its own quiet importance. A leather-bound photo album with a spine frayed from time. Most of the portraits inside were exactly what one would expect. Sepia-toned images of unsmiling faces locked in stiff poses, the kind of photographs so common to the late 1800s that they almost blurred together. But as Claire flipped through page after page, one picture stopped her cold. It was tucked inside a wax sleeve, sealed at the edges, its stock thicker than the rest, as if it were trying to protect itself from the world. Even before she pulled back the wax, she sensed this was no ordinary print. When the snapshot finally appeared, Claire's breath caught. There, unmistakably wearing his stovepipe hat and dark black suit, stood Abraham Lincoln. To his left, sword at his side, Ulysses S. Grant was conversing with George Meade. The turf would strike most historians as well known: Appomattox grounds, April of 1865. Yet the picture was simply impossible to place. It wasn't the staging or the faces. It was the coloring. The image was not at all like the hand-colored photographs that were sold as oddities in the 19th century. This isn't a painting brushed across a print after the fact. It was as spot-on as a modern photograph. Those deep blues of Union uniforms, the wood grain of an empty chair, and the creases in Lincoln's black coat all were captured. The colors seemed baked into the very fabric of the image, not resting delicately on the surface. Claire stared in disbelief. How could a photo like this exist in 1865 when the world was yet to come decades in the future? Doubtful, she took the photograph to Professor George Kramer, a Civil War historian who was an authority on early photography. The moment he laid eyes on it, his face went white. He did not accuse her of a trick or dismiss it as a forgery. Instead, he leaned closer, trembling, and asked one question: "Where did you find this?" Claire went over the attic, the heavy trunk, the wax sleeve. Kramer checked the paper stock and murmured something which made her heart pound. "This is Albemarle silver print from the 1860s. It should not hold color." Anyway, the photograph was sent to the New York Historical Society, where some forensic experts scanned it under high-resolution imaging. What was found shattered every expectation. The pigments weren't painted on, as hand coloring is done. Instead, they were embedded in the very emulsion, almost like Kodachrome. Kodachrome wouldn't be invented until the 1930s. Chemical analysis put the dyes and organic compounds hard in the 1860s. It was terrifyingly clear the photo was not a fake. It was authentic, developed by a process no one was aware of at the time. If it were real, it would no longer be just an artifact, but a threat to the timeline of photographic history itself. Everyone exchanged glances, dread all over their faces, while one muttered, "This photograph should not exist." Yet the scariest detail wasn't chemical. It was human. One face in the frame had no business standing there at all. The man in the middle. While the scientists fixated on chemical compounds and pigment tests, Claire's attention kept drifting back to something else, the human presence that seemed to radiate unease. At first glance, it was a small detail, almost easy to overlook. Lincoln stood tall in his black frock coat. Grant and Meade bore their ceremonial uniforms with dignity, sabers gleaming in the light. But wedged between them, half in shadow, stood a man who didn't belong. His uniform was plain, lacking insignia, badges, or any rank that might identify him. His expression was strangely focused, not the rigid stillness of a posed officer, but a steady gaze that seemed out of place in the scene. He was not looking for the camera, nor distracted by conversation. He looked as though he were waiting for something, a sentinel amidst giants. The longer Claire studied him, the more unsettling the realization became. Every other figure in the photo could be traced, matched to known officers, recorded in rosters, except him. Obsession was perhaps born out of curiosity. She combed through the archives of the Civil War, matching recognized portraits to faces in the photograph. Lincoln, Grant, Meade, confirmed. Several aides, yes. But this figure yielded nothing. No record, no documentation, no name. Plain sight ghost. Then Claire remembered something, a photo from her family's collection taken much later. She brought it up on her cell phone, a shoot from 1912 showing a man standing by a barn, one hand on a dog's head. He was older, heavier, and wearing farmer-type clothes. But the jawline was his. The ears curved the same way. The slope of the eyebrows was unmistakable. This was him, the man in the photo with Lincoln. Claire's heart pounded. This was William Donovan, her great-great-grandfather. She knew the name from childhood, stories, brief mentions, and half-whispered memories, none of which matched with this discovery. She scoured military records trying to find his service history. Finally, she discovered the listing: William Donovan, medic, 104th New York Infantry Regiment. But the record stopped at that. His status? Missing in action, April the 6th, 1865. All at once, the timeline splits in half. Donovan had vanished 3 days before General Lee's surrender at Appomattox on April the 9th. And now he was standing there in a color photo of that very moment between Lincoln and Grant, as though he were meant to be there. Not just improbable, impossible. Professor Kramer scrutinized the two photos. Donovan as a farmer in 1912, and Donovan as a mystery for medics in 1865. Then he furrowed his brow. If he disappeared on April 6th, how does he show up on April 9th? And why here, at Lincoln's side? The questions multiplied faster than they could be answered. Donovan was not on a roster, not engraved on a stone, and not heard of in any account on Appomattox. His standing in this frame looked less like a coincidence, more like a design, as if somebody deliberately erased him from the record. If he wasn't lost, he was reassigned. And the order trail points to a unit that was never supposed to appear on paper. Lincoln's hidden network. The discovery of William Donovan in the photograph might have been dismissed as a coincidence, a misplaced medic accidentally caught in frame, if not for what surfaced next. Professor Kramer, unsettled by the contradictions, dove into late war records with a determination bordering on obsession. Hours passed, then days. Finally, he stumbled on a document so obscure it had likely never been read outside a handful of archivists. It was a War Department memo dated April 1865. In a list of troop movements and assignments was a single line that chilled him. UD, moved to shadow post per Al's request, not to be logged. Claire reread the words over and over. Al's request, she asked. Kramer nodded grimly. Al was one of Lincoln's private nicknames, used in informal communications. It wasn't common, but it surfaces in letters between his closest aides. This memo doesn't just place Donovan outside his regiment. It places him under Lincoln's personal authority. If true, this meant Donovan's disappearance on April the 6th was no disappearance at all. It was a reassignment. And not just any reassignment, but one that deliberately removed him from official rosters. He hadn't been lost in the chaos of the war. He had been hidden. The more Kramer dug, the more things started to fall into place. In scattered journals from Union aides, he found vague references to temporary escorts who were attached to Lincoln in the war's waning days. These men were not generals or soldiers of high rank. They were nameless shadows, chosen precisely because they had little to no public recognition. They moved with Lincoln, stood near him, and observed silently. They carried no titles, left no paper trail, and when the war ended, they faded back into anonymity. What Clare and Kramer were piecing together pointed to something historians had long speculated about but never proven. Lincoln may have built his own informal security network. Distrustful of factions within his own cabinet and aware of conspiracies festering in Washington, he may have turned to hand-picked individuals, people he trusted not to seek power, but to protect him in ways the official chain of command could not. The reveal that left even seasoned experts pale followed. Forensic imaging of Donovan's uniform showed a small, hidden patch sewn beneath the fold of his lapel. Not much, just 3 stitch letters, PEC. Presidential Escort Committee, Kramer said, with a catch in his voice. The appellation never appeared on any official record, Kramer recalls, but he could have sworn there was something vague in the diaries of Lincoln's aides, passing references to private escorts or peculiars stationed near the president. PEC had never been publicly acknowledged. It only existed in whispers, if at all. So the implications really hit. Donovan was not merely a medic, nor was he some sort of casualty of the historical paradigm. He had belonged to an underground organization, Lincoln's Invisible Watchers, which worked completely out of the sight of military organization. They were entrusted with clandestine missions, to observe, to protect, and to act only at the president's own bidding. Claire sat in silence, realizing that her great-great-grandfather's disappearance from history was not mere neglect. It was intent. He was erased, not forgotten. He had been involved in an operation mainly intended to keep him invisible, to never have his name written down on paper. But under that discreet patch lay something colder than rumor, threadwork that turned the image into a countdown. The message that changed everything. The discovery of the hidden badge on William Donovan's lapel was shocking enough, but the most unsettling revelation was still waiting. While scanning the photograph once more under spectral imaging, Elsa, the forensic expert at the New York Historical Society, noticed something faint beneath the patch. At first, it looked like stray fibers or wear from age, but as she adjusted the filters, a deliberate pattern began to emerge. It wasn't damaged, it was stitching. Carefully enhancing the scan, Elsa revealed a few words sewn into the uniform itself, concealed just beneath the fold of the lapel. The thread was nearly identical to the wool, slightly lighter in shade, so that it blended almost perfectly with the fabric. But the message became unmistakable as the words sharpened into focus. Target verified. Stand until April 14th. Silence descended over the room. Nobody made a sound. Claire was choking on her breath. The night between April 14th and 15th, 1865, was the night of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln in Ford's Theater. It wasn't just a date written in a history book. That date signified the death of an era. That date signified the day the country lost its leader to a bullet. And here it lay, concealed in some coat on her great-great-grandfather's back, warning against something yet to happen at the time this photo was taken. Professor Kramer leaned forward over the table, his total complexion now ashen. "This isn't battlefield language," he muttered. "Target verified sounds like surveillance, not medicine." Donovan wasn't just reassigned, he was given an order. The words on that lapel suggest that Donovan was told to do more than simply keep watch. He had been given orders to observe, maybe even intervene, until a specific cut-off date, the very day when Lincoln was shot. The serious implications chilled the heart. Could he have been part of a last-ditch defense, standing protectively over Lincoln against a danger that all feared and nobody dared publicly acknowledge? Or was this message a dire admission that his assignment was to end on the night history remembers for tragedy? Claire remembered an ancient family letter her grandfather had shown to her, yellowed and with fading ink that was barely readable, but whose contents had been set in Donovan's own handwriting decades after the war. A cryptic warning. If you ever find the photograph with the chair, burn it. It was never meant to be kept. Then it appeared only as almost eccentric family lore, but alongside the stitched words, it is now a desperate plea. Donovan had known something. He'd been too close to a secret that needed to be kept. The more seriously the team considered the evidence, the heavier the room felt. If Donovan was told to stand until April 14th, he knew there was a threat. He might have been looking for conspirators. He might have been meant to intervene, but history has no record of any such attempt. Lincoln died, and simultaneously Donovan faded from the records. It seemed far too neat, too perfect to be a coincidence. What haunted Claire the most was the thought that Donovan had been silenced before he could act, or that he was hidden for the protection of the truth. Conspicuously absent in the records, the stitched-out message, and his very own letter to a future generation pointed towards a cover-up too dangerous to be spoken about. The photo was now elevated from just a piece of evidence concerning impossible technology, maybe a never-recorded figure, to something much deeper. The hard evidence that the death of Lincoln may not have been a simple tragedy of chance, but still a shadowy story left untold. If the photo was a tool, who was it made for? And why did a letter signed only Al beg that it never survive? Legacy buried in silence. By the time Claire Donovan had pieced together the story, the photograph no longer felt like an heirloom. It was a burden, heavy with secrets that had outlived the man who carried them. The stitched message, the impossible color process, the unexplained presence of her great-great-grandfather beside Lincoln, all of it pointed toward a reality that history had quietly erased. But the truth had not finished revealing itself. Hidden within the lining of the same album that once protected the photo was a fragile envelope. Folded tightly, faded by time, it bore no address. Just 2 words scrawled in slanted ink. To William. Inside was a single page. The handwriting was deliberate, firm despite its age. As Professor Kramer read the words aloud, the room fell silent. My dearest William, if nothing else came out of this war, it is that truth seldom interests those who need it the most. You were chosen not to draw your sword, but to stand visible among those who do. If history forgets you, let it. Some men fight with swords, others with silence. Al. But this signature, though only initials, had a weight that one could never ignore. Neither a general nor a politician, it sounded like Lincoln himself, writing in his last days to the man he trusted to remain by his side. The letter was much more than affectionate instruction. It was directive, given as a final charge to William Donovan to occupy the shadows of history without complaint. All became clear to Claire. Her ancestor had not merely gone missing in action. He had been actively erased, kept away to guard a secret too dangerous for Lincoln's time. The very photo itself, a blend of experimental techniques, was never meant to see the light of day. Rather, it was a message down through time, a legacy rendered in color and silence. Donovan had carried it, concealed it, and asked his descendants to destroy it because keeping it was in itself keeping the secret. But the photo did not die, opposite orders, opposite warning. The photo re-emerged more than 100 years later. By now, the story had gone far beyond the family of Donovan, and so upon it descended collectors and networks, promising riches, fame, and ownership. But Claire rejected every one. The photo was not for sale. It was not meant to grace some museum wall or lend its cachet to a documentary trailer. For her, it was a piece of living history, entrusted to her family perhaps by accident, but to be carried forth with the same vigilance that had characterized William Donovan's life. But Claire had still known that the truth could not be locked in silence forever. So, working with the New York Historical Society, she mounted the exhibit called The Man Who Stood Anyway. In its center stood the photograph, enlarged and sheathed in glass. Visitors saw Lincoln's weary eyes, the glint of Grant's saber, the empty wooden chair, and that nameless figure whom history has almost lost. Beside it was a biographical reconstruction of the fragments that told Donovan's tale, not as the soldier who fought gloriously, but as the man chosen to quietly stand at the edge of history. If this story pulled you into the space between what happened and what we were told, like the video, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dives into hidden chapters. When you're ready for another untold mystery, watch the next video on your screen. We're peeling back the curtain on artifacts that were never meant to be found.